Yo, what's good, Spirit Squad? So it's your boy Dre, and today we've got a huge piece of news in pretty much every area of the multiverse. So if you somehow haven't heard already, the news is about a day old at this point, and it is real. Uro is getting banned in almost every constructed format. It's already banned in standard, of course, but it is definitely getting the axe in Pioneer, Historic, and Modern. They've even talked about potentially banning Uro in Legacy in a really, really big update from their Secret Lair drop, and it's called, what is it, the Smitten Super Drop, their Valentine's Day, basically info dump of Secret Lair stuff. But one of the secret lairs contained a Frost Titan and a Primeval Titan and Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, so this is a fairly titanic update. And the good news about this update, though, is that we straight up know that we no longer have to worry about Uro being the big be-all, end-all, and really only win condition of your slower decks of all the formats you like playing. Now we can actually have some variation again. So, and they've even discussed banning this thing in Legacy. Granted, I'm going to leave that discussion up to the Legacy experts, but this has huge, huge, huge implications for even that format. So, I've gone ahead and actually snipped the actual readout from the update from Wizards themselves, so check this out. It's, note, we are planning an upcoming ban and restricted announcement. In that announcement, we plan to ban Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath in Pioneer, Modern, and Historic. Additionally, we are continuing discussions about doing the same in Legacy. While we are still working internally on a larger BNR announcement for that week, we wanted to share this information ahead of this sale, which lets everybody know that yes, they know that they are putting Uro in one of the secret lair drops, and they don't want to just scum people out by having you spend, what is it, 35 or 40 bucks or whatever it is to get your Uro, your Primeval Titan, and your Frost Titan, and then not be able to use your Uro in like 3 to 4 formats. So at least I'll give them points for not being ultra scummy about that part of things. But this is still a pretty interesting announcement because while it does answer some questions, i.e. is Uro getting banned, it does raise more questions. For the first part of things, we don't know when this ban announcement is coming. We assume it is coming this Monday, Monday being the 15th of February, but we don't actually know that that's happening. And second, it says that it's part of a larger ban and restricted announcement, which tells me that they are going to do something to potentially address either Tybalt's Trickery or Valky God of Lies, or both, because Tybalt's Trickery has taken over quite a few formats, and Valky at this point has all but destroyed Modern already, and it's only been like half a week. So we've got a lot going on. Like, we don't know what's going on with Valky, with Tybalt's Trickery, the Cascade mechanic as a whole, or Sibian Spirit Guide, and I kind of feel like a little bit of a traitor saying that because it's a Simian Spirit Guide. But, you know, here we are. But we do know that Uro is leaving Modern. And even if Modern as a format will be healthier for it, it is a bit of a double-edged sword for us, specifically as Spirits pilots. So on one hand, of course, we straight up love the Uro matchups, right? So even though these decks were playing Ren and 6, we're still not sad about seeing the Uro matchup. And over the last month, we have straight up seen that we're doing a great job at beating up on these Uro decks, and we have a good amount of interaction to deal with most of the other decks in Modern as well, making it so that we've actually catapulted ourselves all the way up to being the 5th best deck in the entire meta. And it is going to be a little bit of a sad time for us kind of getting off of that throne, if you will, but if the format is going to be that much healthier and people are actually going to want to play Modern, then I feel like we can kind of deal with that, because we still have a lot of interaction to deal with the fair decks that'll see play, or rather that will be allowed to see play once Uro and friends leave the format. And again, we do stand to lose some percentage points because we're no longer beating up on the best deck in the format. And that's just something that comes and goes. Like, we're already used to being a tier 2, tier 3 deck. So returning to that place in the meta is a little bit sad because we enjoyed our time on top here, but it's really isn't like the end of the world. Like, we've been there for years. We'll get there again, and we can still continue to win because our deck is still good. So I'm still not ultra sad about losing our place in that we can just beat up on the best deck in the format, but it is at least a point that should be acknowledged. So we're going to be here talking about that. And I do enjoy, of course, the fact that a lot of other decks are going to kind of be unlocked by Uro leaving the format. And people are already going to be just playing the decks that we've already been seeing anyway. So the decks that have been playing even though Uro was in the format. So like Prowess, like Hammer Time, like Death Shadow decks, stuff like that is just gonna continue to see play, right? But decks that were previously held back by Uro can kind of be unlocked so that they can see play again. And the cool part about that is that a lot of these are decks that we actually beat up on. So that includes decks like Blue-White Control with Supreme Verdict and stuff. That includes things like traditional Jund, where they're just like, hey, here's a Thoughtseize, here's a Goyf, here's a Liliana. Like, you know, Boomer Jund, if you will. Um, like, Prowess is still going to see play, but a lot of the random combo decks that were held back because all of the Earl decks played like 45 counter spells in their decks, like a lot of those decks will actually get to be unlocked and they'll see play again. So like your miscellaneous Urza piles, your things like Jeskai Ascendancy, Oops All Spells, um, just if you can think of some random combo deck that was previously locked out by the fact that your best deck was playing 4 Force Negation in the 75, that's something that's no longer going to end up being the case, because chances are some non-blue deck is going to catapult to the #1 spot because Modern is just a huge freaking format. And Uro not taking up that #1 spot should unlock a lot of other archetypes to be able to see play. So like the aggressive just miscellaneous attack decks of the format should actually be able to see play. So humans and spirits and like merfolk were already pretty good because we can both attack and have some game against like the Tybalt's Trickery decks and stuff. But assuming something happens to those decks too, all three of those archetypes will still have a place since Uro will not be gaining life and pushing us out of the format. Um, there's a lot of really good stuff here. So I'm actually pretty excited about still being able to play the format, but expecting a little bit of a wider variety of decks to be in the format. And I've actually gone ahead and pulled up a bit of a sample deck list just so we can maybe get an idea of where we might want to start being post Uro, and assuming that something happens to the Valky Cascade deck. So once again, we don't know whether that something is going to be a reworking of the Cascade mechanic. We don't know whether it is going to be a banning of Simian Spirit Guide. No clue. But I'm assuming something is happening to that combination of cards this coming Monday. And this list is built with that assumption in mind. So let's check this out. And this is, of course, a Bant list. And most things about this Bant list are pretty normal for being Bant, right? So we've got your 21 lands, your 4 Noble Hierarchs, 4 Collected Companies, and 3 Aether Vials. But once again, I expect decks like Death Shadow and like Jund to kind of make a reappearance in the format. So this is going to be a list with 4 full Rattle Chains in Bant. This is not blue-white. I'm playing 4 Rattle Chains in Bant on purpose. It plays Akira. It's playing 4 Drog Skull Captains, of course, but 3 Aether Vials and all 4 Collected Companies. So this list is straight up assuming that a lot of people are going to be trying to, I guess, kind of rebuy their way into fair Magic over the next couple of weeks. So this is assuming people are playing things like Jund, like Black-Red Midrange. This is going to be assuming people are playing things like Death Shadow, Death and Taxes, just a lot of high impact cards that can ignore a lot of what your opponent really wants to do. So like Kira, for example, just ignores almost all of the removal from a lot of these more fair decks. You're playing 3 Aether Vials and not 4 because we expect a lot of people to be playing cards like Thoughtseize again. And you don't really want to have a deck just kind of flood you out on mana on its own by having like 4 Aether Vials and 4 Noble Hierarchs and 21 lands. So we're only going to be playing 3 Aether Vials in this list. but it's got a lot of really high impact stuff. Like we got 13 3-drops. Just all of our 2-drops are very high impact. There's no taxing stuff or relatively low impact stuff like Unsettled Mariner. Um, Unsettled Mariner could make its way into the deck though, because a lot of people could just be on burn and on prowess, and that's a place where Unsettled Mariner certainly shines. But for the first couple of weeks, I don't know if that's where I would want to start. That could be where we finish though, so kind of keep that in mind. And then our sideboard is going to be just a bunch of relatively high impact cards that solve all of the problems that I believe we should be seeing in the first couple of weeks. So we've got 3 Burnt and Forge Tenders against the Prowess decks, against the Burn decks. Both of those decks are already seeing play with Uro in the format, and I expect them to get a little better with Uro leaving the format. We've got 3 copies of Path to Exile, and that's just going to solve a bunch of miscellaneous problems. Like, it's going to be good against Hammer Time, it's going to be good against Death Shadow, it's going to be good against humans, and all of those are already seeing play. 2 Rest in Peaces and 2 Remorseful Clerics are going to do a lot of really good work, of course against graveyard decks, and I expect there to be a little resurgence of things like Oops All spells, so that's definitely going to be something where we really want to be aware of, that, hey, this could very well come up. And to that effect, we've also got 2 copies of Collector Roof. Now, not only is this going to be good against things like Tron, which I expect to be allowed back into the format, but it's also going to be good against Hammer Time, and it's going to be good against just miscellaneous decks that use mana rocks. So things like Ad Nauseam, things like Oops All spells. Just look for random places where Collector Roof has the ability to be very good, because shutting down mana rocks is a surprisingly big part of your game against combo decks. So that's just going to be something that we really want to be aware of. And speaking of game against combo decks, we've got an Eidolon of Rhetoric. Now, we're only going to be playing 1 because we're not expecting Tibalt deck to live, either Tibalt deck. So we don't expect the Tibalt Planeswalker deck or the Tibalt Trickery deck to really make it past this Monday's update. Assuming that is the case, 1 Eidolon of Rhetoric will probably solve most of the problems that we will actually have to deal with post-Monday. So it'll help with Oops All spells, it'll help with really all of your turn 1 and turn 2 combo decks. It'll help with decks like Storm, which will certainly still see play. It'll help with just a whole lot of problems that we just don't want to deal with as a whole. And our last 2 spots here are going to go to Mystical Disputes. Now, Mystical Disputes here because our deck, even though it has some game against Storm, it is not actually good against Storm. It just has some game against it. So we want Mystical Dispute to be able to counter those Mana Bears, to be able to counter those Gifts Ungiven, things like that. And as I said earlier, I do expect decks like Blue-White Control to make a comeback now that Uro is leaving the format. So Mystical Dispute will help with things like countering those Teferi Time Ravelers, and just make it so that we don't really have to worry about getting bodied by that card by itself, because while we can win through a Teferi, it's annoying, so let's just solve the problem before we even have to deal with it, right? And that's where I think I would start as far as a Bant list is concerned. Now, normally I wouldn't really want to be playing Bant because I simply happen to like Blue-White better. Now, that's not to say Bant is bad by any means. I've never thought it was bad. It's still great. It's a very powerful version of Spirits. But the reason I'm specifically building into Bant with this coming up week is because, again, the Uro deck is leaving the format. The upside to the Uro deck leaving the format is that there will be fewer Wrenn and 6s to worry about. Fewer Wrenn and 6s means that we can actually expect our Noble Hierarchs to untap a lot more often than we would otherwise. And Noble Hierarch being a liability against Wrenn and 6 is a lot of why I haven't been playing Bant lately. With the 4-color Uro deck no longer being a thing, I don't expect to have to worry about the Wrenn and 6s. So we're going to jam some Noble Hierarchs. And that's not to say that people will not be playing decks like Ponza, decks like Prowess that use Lava Dart and Gut Shot, stuff like that. Those are still going to be around. So, it's not a freebie. But I expect Noble Hierarch to be able to untap a little more than it was previously, and I think that's a good enough reason to want to play Bant. But this is going to be where my starting list is now that we know Uro is leaving the format, and we think the Cascade decks are no longer going to be allowed to play. But yeah, I'm very excited about what's going to come from Modern, so let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, and just let me know exactly what you would do with your spirits lists now that we know Uro is gone and we think Cascade is gone. So if you have any thoughts to contribute, let me know. And if you like what you're watching, as always, just make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell, and I will see y'all on the next one.